Hey, it's Terry, and this is the Something Spooky review of The Hunt, which was released in 2020 by Universal. It was directed by Craig Zobel, and its reputation precedes it. It is a controversial movie. It had been delayed. It has been talked about by press outlets on both sides of the political aisle as being something that's dangerous. Donald Trump tweeted about it, saying that it was inciting division and violence. So it's a very controversial movie. There's a lot of conversation around it. So there's just a lot going on with this movie before you even watch it. There's been a lot said about it. Its taglines say things like, the most talked about movie of the year and one of the most controversial movies ever, decide for yourself. And supposedly it got these real mixed reactions at festivals and early screenings or whatever. So there's just a lot of baggage with this movie, just with its title and before you even start watching it. And it kind of, knows that, I feel like, and knew how it was going to be received because it does just relentlessly go out of its way to be political and shocking. It throws a lot of buzzwords around and has some kind of real stark conflict between red and blue ideologies. It uses words like deplorables and snowflakes and a lot worse than that. So that is going on through this whole movie, but it's very upfront, and ultimately I don't think it really amounts to anything. I don't think it has any real message. I don't think it falls on any real side of the political aisle. I think it's kind of just throwing all of this stuff up in the air, for everybody to see, for good or bad, but it's not really like leaning one way itself, very much trying to offend everybody, but it kind of ends up really saying nothing about anything because it never commits to anything. There's never anything in it that feels like it's taking itself too seriously. It is a comedic movie. There's a lot of things that are meant to be comical and are done in this kind of tongue-in-cheek way. So that's one thing that kind of helps it, is that it doesn't feel like it's trying to be too clever with any of this. It somewhat recognizes what it is and what it's trying to be, and that it just doesn't take itself very seriously ever about anything. So that's kind of good, but it also kind of leads to it just like being kind of pointless and just kind of exposing all of this stuff without saying anything about it. It's basically just kind of like reading through a comment section online, and seeing all of the ugliness there, which is maybe what it's trying to reflect, but it ultimately doesn't really add anything to that. It just presents it outside of all of that, just as its own movie, outside of all of its political messaging. It's okay. It's a pretty entertaining action horror movie. It is, as I've said, unpredictable throughout. So I'm not going to get into much with like the actual progression of the story or specific moments, because it is definitely meant to be a kind of suspense, a weird kind of suspense where you really don't know what to expect from the movie and you kind of don't know where it's going or why it's happening. So I don't want to spoil any of that, but that is what makes it kind of interesting. And it is an entertaining watch, at least the first time, you're kind of trying to keep up with it, and it does make it feel a bit like a wild ride. And there's a lot of it is a horror movie. Ultimately, they say that it's very gory, despite all of this kind of like mainstream talk about it. It is a very gory movie. Now, it's not as gory as like some horror movies, but right away, you're kind of let to know what to expect, or how to not be prepared for things. Like within the first 10 minutes of the scene, there's some there's some real gore, and that continues. There's a lot of like real in-your-face violence, but there's also a lot of comedy, as I've said, and there's a lot of action. There's parts where it feels almost more like an action movie than a horror movie, because there's like these big action scenes and effects and fight scenes and stuff like that. So it kind of toes that line of being like action horror, and there's comedy elements, and it does all of that pretty well. Like I said, it's entertaining, if nothing else. It may not be, revolutionary, but it's at least a pretty entertaining movie the first time you watch it. And there are some good performances, of course, led by Betty Gilpin. She's the lead character, and she's terrific in it. There's a lot of familiar faces that pop up throughout the movie, and they're kind of they're the type of familiar faces. A lot of them are from TV, or, they've been in, smaller projects or whatever, where it's like you recognize them, but, it's not like this all-star cast. It's like, oh, it's that person. And, a lot of the time they kind of come in and out pretty quickly. There's a lot of characters in this movie that, don't stick around for a long time. So, like, it's this interesting, like, constant wheel of, performances coming in and out, and most of them are pretty strong. Overall, like I said, it's an entertaining movie, and the performances are strong. The effects are pretty cool. There's some cool action scenes. It's not, it never really feels very consequential in any way, because it is taking itself in such a weird manner, and it does have such a clear focus on this other aspect, this political shocking aspect that on its own, the story being told, the movie, isn't groundbreaking, certainly, and it doesn't even hit as hard. It doesn't feel as resonant as other movies in its genre. So it's trying to do this whole other thing, and that is where the attention of the movie is most of the time. If you peel that back, then there is a competent movie there, but not, an outstanding one. Ultimately, it comes back to that message and what the movie is, and like, it is shocking. Like I said, when I first saw it, I kind of was just like, man, I at least don't know what's going on, and I really am kind of confused. And so in that way, it did feel kind of unique and fresh and shocking. Will it always though? I don't know. It does feel very like a moment of its time, and one of those things that could end up feeling very dated very quickly, which, it's locked into this current conversation. So maybe it's not meant to last forever, but it's one of those things that I think you could look back on and like, not only does it feel like it's talking about things at the time, it kind of feels like a product of its time. And I don't know if it's always going to retain that shock intrigue element that kind of is so at the heart of the experience of the movie right now. There's this line in the movie where the characters are talking and they say, it depends on if they are smart pretending to be idiots or if they are idiots pretending to be smart in relation to their plot. And I think that's kind of how I feel about this movie, which is, maybe a self-aware point. So good on them for recognizing that. But that's ultimately my feeling. I was like, I don't know if this was like a dumb movie trying to be smart or a smart movie being dumb. It's kind of hard to tell. And I just walked away from it feeling confused, but I was entertained. So overall, I did like The Hunt. I'm going to give it a B. I think it's an interesting movie and it is kind of a fun movie, but I don't think it quite, really breaks the ground that maybe it was trying to. It's hard to say exactly what it was trying to do, but it is worth a watch. It's interesting. I hope you enjoyed the review. If you did, give it a like and remember to follow Something Spooky.